Chapter 1, Prism, Mirror, Lens. To wound the autumnal city, so howled out for the world to give him a name, the Indark answered with wind. All you know, I know, careening astronauts and bank clerks glancing at the clock before lunch, actresses cowling at light-ringed mirrors and freight elevator operators grinding a thumbful of grease on a steel handle, student riots. Know that dark women in bodegas shook their heads last week because in 6 months prices have risen outlandishly. How coffee tastes after you've held it in your mouth, cold, a whole minute. A whole minute he squatted, pebbles clutched with his left foot, the bare one, listening to his breath sound tumble down the ledges. Oh, I never, in all my put together, in all my days, ever have read anything like that. This is one of my favorite books of all time. Beautiful, intriguing, poetic, conceptual, disorienting, grounding. The whole thing, I felt so unmoored and I felt so locked in. This just did it for me. Woo! I read this a long time ago. I started it in November of 2018 and I finished it in April of 2019. I took a big rest because, inappropriate warning for kids, I guess, there's a ton of sexually explicit content in this. A ton. And I was getting so like, oh, I can't stomach this. And so I took like a long time off in between. I'm not trying to analyze this book. I just want to share why I'm so in love with it and why it lives rent-free in my head. Actually, I pay it to live with me. This is the first book of Delaney that I ever read, and it's so far the only book that I've ever finished. I have a number of his other books. I've read the beginnings or the opening few dozen pages of a few of them. I've actually read half of Triton, and I really like them. I like this way more than I like all of his other work so far. I think that it best fits his style and his approach better than any other book. It's like the purest, it's like his manifesto work. I discovered it in 2018. I remember seeing it on the bookshelf and seeing this spine. Love the cover. Just the name Dhalgren. What is it? It wasn't something like The Knife's Edge or something that it could kind of apply to millions and millions of stories. It's one weird word. I judged the book by its cover. The major novel of love and terror at the end of time. Those four things, dude, a major novel and love. If this on the outside here is claiming that one of its big identifiers is it's a major novel of love, and then mixing that with terror, ooh, I love that. That makes me think of like when the beginning of Ratatouille, when he like takes the bite of the cheese, the bite of the strawberry, and then he starts to like mix these things together and he creates these surprising dishes because he's doing more than just giving you a typical meal.
I brought you something to... No! Spit that out right now!
So it's a major novel of love and terror at the end of time? That's amazing. And then just seeing this huge sun, and in front of it, all these burnt out skyscrapers and big buildings. And then, the craziest thing to me, standing in the foreground are these three dudes who just look like normal dudes in like the 60s and 70s, just standing there with their hands in their pockets. And I love that contrast of this absolutely destroyed world, the sun that looks so close it looks like it would boil everything alive. And then in this completely dystopian, post-apocalyptic looking picture, this environment, are just these three dudes. I was very expectant. And the fact that it says by Samuel R. Delaney, 4-time Nebula Award winner. Like, that's promising. I had never heard of Samuel Delaney before. I had never heard of Dahlgren. When I looked at the titles, I was hooked. Especially looking and seeing modern dudes here, and this the mix of all these. It's so academic, but then so like an ancient Greek play, like Sophocles would have written like a play called House of the Axe or something like that. It just has this classical feel to it. It feels mythological. These Shakespearean times, Elizabethan times in London, and it's evoking so many different thoughts and images and emotions in me just reading these titles. They seem so abstract and yet so promising. All the words on the front were very impressive. Aesthetically, the whole thing looked great. The picture drew me in, and on the back, this sealed it. The sun has grown deadly. The world has gone mad. Society has perished. Savagery rules over all. All that was known is over. All that was familiar is strange and terrible. Today and yesterday collide with tomorrow. In these dying days of Earth, a young drifter enters the city. I felt this was a very promising quote to have at the beginning. The quote is, "You have confused the true and the real." The fact that it starts off mid-sentence, oh, I love that. Starts off mid-sentence with a lowercase t to wound, and no ellipses, to wound the autumnal city, period. Next paragraph, one sentence, so howled out for the world to give him a name, period. Next paragraph, one line, the in-dark answered with wind, period. Next line, next paragraph, all you know I know. And then it's this long, like this snapshot, but never really explaining it, but it feels like you're giving me a lot of context, but disconnected context with which I'm able to settle into the world a bit. And then it goes right into this very specific story. And I love that his language, his voice stays, it doesn't stay exactly the same because he changes his approach, but like the tone, the way that he's telling the story, it's consistent the whole way through. It's not like he starts out really gripping and then devolves into very basic, boring prose, very simple, just telling the next plot point. And yet, it doesn't stay so abstract the whole way through so that it's like I'm reading 800-something pages of madness. It's like I'm reading just a book on philosophy. He is telling a narrative, and it's very practical, very grounded, with a ton of different relationships, incredible mystery. There's progress throughout the whole story. It's amazing. And so every time it breaks into these really abstract, reflective little sections, these little moments, oh, they're so satisfying. I would say he's primarily physical in his writing and his emphasis, then intellectual, or more psychological. There's emotion in there, but it's not really emphasized, or at least sentimentality doesn't have really a place in his works. So, as far as I can tell, the sense of mystery is one of the best that I've ever experienced in any book I've ever read. The desire to know, the desire to piece things together, that he even specifically talks about the sense of like paranoia that he's feels like he's beginning to experience. And I was like, you sly dog. Like that's what you're trying to create in the reader, and it's absolutely working. The feeling of expectation of like all of this has to piece together, right? It puts you through such a journey. It gives you such a clear experience of shifting perspectives and experiencing having your brain like flit and shift as you suddenly see it from this angle, suddenly from this angle, and it's the same content, but it looks totally different depending on the perspective that you're looking at it from. I was fully invested in the characters, and I always wanted to get to know them more, and he was so restrained the whole way through, and yet, like, I was always waiting for him to give more information, and sometimes he suddenly would, and I would just be, like, lapping it up. And the entire story takes place in one city, with a very small population left in it. Very communal in a way, even though it's stratified. And that's another thing, the sense of hierarchy and social stratification, and the absurdity of people trying to live as if they're not living in a post-apocalyptic city or world, trying to live like they're in normal, middle-class, modern America still, is so cool. The psychologically, so many of these characters are so intriguing. And again, Delaney is so beautifully restrained. It made me feel like I was there more, like I was looking at them and being like, who are you? What is going on with you right now? Rather than having everything spoon-fed to me. It's still great to have internal monologues and stuff, but this book is full of internal monologues, and they're of the most intriguing kind. Like the way he writes, his syntax, his patterns. He breaks up a lot of his sentences with dashes and then comes back and finishes the sentence, and the information that he's added, the way he does it, it always feels like Ayn Rand writes with the most impressive, clear forward momentum that I've ever experienced, I think, in any author. Everything always, especially in Atlas Shrugged, everything feels like a train that's just moving forward. It's always moving forward. And every little clause and moment in the sentence is contributing and pushing us forward. Delaney is like fractured and disjointed, and yet it all feels whole and complete, and he modifies things as he goes. He doesn't like give an action and then do a comma, which I feel like is something that I've struggled with for a long time, and something I think I notice in a lot of more amateur writers. You write your sentence and then comma, and then you kind of modify it at the end when there's no more action to really introduce. You're just kind of explaining things more, like he looked away, frowning slightly. He sat down and crossed a foot over his leg, scratching his knee. He did this, comma, and then here's another little extra description. I think that's usually pretty amateurish. Ayn Rand doesn't do that basically ever, unless she's going to complicate or contrast something with that extra clause, and then it's like, whoa, you just like set something up and then woof, I'm going even faster forward now. He breaks up his thoughts and layers different kinds of thoughts. Let's see if I can find one. But State's got such a damned good poli-sci department. Had, anyway. So I came here. And she dropped her eyes. Brown, he realized with a half-second memory, as he looked at her lowered, corn-colored lashes. Brown with a coppery backing. Copper like her hair. I stayed. You were here when it happened? Yes. He heard a question mark there bigger than any in the type box. What? And when he said, happened, he didn't want an answer. Her eyes widened, dropped again. Her shoulders sank, her back rounded. She reached toward his hand in its cage, lying between them on the bench. As she took a shiny blade tip between two fingers, he was aware of his palm's suspension in its harness. Could you make an... She tugged the point to the side. He felt the pressure on his wrist and stiffened his hand, released it, a muffled thum. Oh, he was puzzled. I was wondering, she explained, if you could make it ring, like an instrument. All the blades are different lengths. I thought if they made notes, perhaps you could play them. Blade steel? I don't think it's brittle enough. Bells and things are iron. She bent her head to the side. Things have to be brittle if they're going to ring, like glass. Knives are hard, sure, but they're too flexible. That's just one example, and probably not even near the best example of just the amazing flow. We've got dialogue going on, but it's never just he said, she said, he said, she said, and it's done. It's full of all the thoughts that are flitting in during the conversation. It's full of physical contact, and it's so rewarding. And because there's mystery underneath, and people mention things, and it's like, you don't know if the person's ever going to come back and explain something for exposition's sake. No one is ever going to do anything for exposition's sake in this story. So you're getting these real life glimpses, and yet it feels like everything is intentional. It feels like it's all there for a reason. If it just felt arbitrary, then I think I would have lost interest in the book very early on. There was a quote from someone, some big sci-fi author, who said that this book is a riddle that isn't meant to be solved. That sort of thing isn't necessarily my cup of tea, but this time, boy, was it. I love the orchid. Like, there's certain little things in this book. It's a sci-fi book, but it feels so just modern, stripped down, minimalist, post-apocalyptic. There's a Shakespearean vibe to it somehow for me. This theatrical, or more like a Clockwork Orange. It feels like a Clockwork Orange, but more accessible, but just as savage and weird and beautiful and intriguing and appalling. It's a delicious combination for me. The orchid, these like knife blades that you can wear, that's super cool, very unique. The, what are they called? Something on your body, I don't really remember, but it's like you turn it on and it creates this light costume of light. Like you could be a dinosaur or a monster or a teddy bear, or I don't really know what else, I don't remember. But they're just a couple, 2 or 3 little sci-fi-ish or savage little things that show up that make this feel like it's not an ordinary modern city. And everything else just feels like an ordinary modern rundown city. Yeah, I love all the interrupted thoughts that give you impressions that are harmonious. And even if it's discord, it's like a calculated discord. So much mention of light and darkness and shadows and webbing and fire. It gets me reflecting. It's largely the experience of the book as a whole, the scraps of conversation, the visual imagery, the sensory experience of the book that I feel like it has introduced many thoughts and it has affected my worldview, and it's given me kind of new aspects to add to my paradigm, all basically subconsciously, which ultimately that's what That's what the Bible's supposed to do. That's what any good, in my opinion, like good living word is supposed to do, is that as you meditate on it, it affects you largely in ways that you're not even aware of. The word of God is literally meant to transform you. Like it's living and active. It is going to do a work in you as you just meditate on it and abide in it. It has power. So words have power, even if they are not overtly spiritual words. And so even though this guy probably disagrees with virtually every one of my fundamental beliefs, there's something that he's communicating that is an aspect of truth that belongs in my paradigm. But what is it? There's a surrender to feeling that the world is larger than you can understand, and a surrender to the moment, to just living this moment and to fully immersing in it. Everything is so grounded, so here and now. And you almost can't be anything else like that. They've been forced into this because time is, there are weird things that happen that are extremely disorienting. So all you have left is your consciousness and subconsciousness in this moment. There's like a simplicity and a humility in a lot of these characters in a weird way, not like a beautiful, saintly humility that you would find in Les Mis or something like that. It's not like, it's like this Jean Valjean humility, like, I want to be a servant. I think he might almost say it's like an animalistic humility, where it's like, well, this is all I know, and even that, I don't really know it, and so I'm just going to be. In that sense, it embodies an aspect of Christianity, presence, full engagement and immersion in this moment. We know way less than we think we know. The gospel is, I was lost, I was dead in my sins and trespasses, and God made me alive together in Christ. All of our peace and our surrender to the moment should now come from resting in Christ's good shepherdness. Resting as a sheep, you make me lie down in green pastures, you lead me beside still waters. And even when I go through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And so it doesn't mean like, just chill, dude, everything's gonna be fine. But it means stop prioritizing, trying to figure everything out. Lean into this moment. The life that God has for you, you can only ever experience it today. Would I recommend this? That's a great question, me. Yes, a million times yes, but with a huge caveat, or disclaimer rather. I would not recommend it to anyone under 18. Any sexually explicit content can like mess someone up, being exposed to that. But the one thing it does have going for it is that it feels very like, it doesn't feel like 50 Shades of Grey or some book that's glorifying it. It feels almost like you're watching a nature documentary and you're watching like two buffalo go at it, and it's like, why is this happening right now? It's not glorifying it. It's not trying to, in my opinion, the book's not glorifying it, but it's in there. It's in there, deep. So, yes, I would recommend it to anyone who feels grounded and settled in their identity, to anyone who feels like they're ready for a new experience or something to kind of shake them up and maybe disorient them and be a fun time to go and get lost in something and potentially come back changed, but you are already grounded in your identity. If you're like that kind of person, then yes, I recommend this book. If you feel you're in a season where you're easily swayed or where you feel like you can't handle really like dark or heavy or bleak things, then probably steer away from this. So, reader beware. If you're going to check it out, just beware. There's a lot of weird stuff in it, and it's pretty bleak, but it's also freaking incredible, and in its own way, enthrallingly beautiful. Maybe I'll do a second video on this down the road, because I could go on. I freaking love this book. For now, all I will say is, ad vitam, et gloriam Dei. God bless. I think that's about it.